Make a long story short, my daughter has allergies and she was sick yesterday, and so I was supposed to come yesterday. And the flight I was initially on was delayed, so they moved me to another flight. That one ended up being delayed. In the middle of that, I somehow left my bag in one of the 5 Ubers I took that day. And apparently, said Uber driver, instead of calling me back when I went to request, did he have my bag, left it at a Safeway where he picked up his next passenger. So 1 star for that. But thankfully, like an hour ago, the Safeway called and said, hey, somebody left this bag here and it's got your phone number. And I said, fantastic, I will have my babysitter come get it. So all's well that ends well. But so, who am I and what am I doing here? Like, why is there a random lawyer on stage at the Ruby on Rails conference? And the answer is because the majority of my career has been trying to save engineers and coders from themselves. Not that you all need saving all the time, but sometimes it's just helping to refine ideas, understand where there may be blind spots, or there are things that you haven't necessarily thought of, and I'll give you some examples of that along the way in the presentation. Also, what I want is for you all to be completely vocal and interactive. I am more of an interactive person, so talking at people is not typically my jam. I know most lawyers are not that way, but that also makes me a special unicorn, that I'm a black woman that's a lawyer that works in tech that doesn't like to actually talk at people. So what are we going to discuss today? Ethical issues in the law and tech with product ideation, creation, and shipping issues. And the reason why I believe that this is important to give this message to you all is that you all are really on the front lines. And in the last 2 years, we have seen where design and engineering and coding has led to subversion of democracy and, you know, all kinds of other fun mishaps. Sorry, if anybody actually did not believe there was subversion of democracy, I have beachfront property in Idaho to sell you. But that's really the truth, is that you all are the front line of defense. And I understand that there may be junior coders in here, there may be more senior. And so it's hard, to the gentleman's prior point about imposter syndrome, it's hard to raise your voice in a room, particularly to be the dissenting voice, and particularly to be the dissenting voice when you are either a woman or a person of color, or maybe even from a rural background. It's hard to raise your voice and say, well, have you thought about this? Or how would a blind person use this? Or how are we marketing this if this is what we're going to create? So we're going to touch on all of those things. So, any good lawyer will tell you diction matters. How you define a word is paramount. So, diversity, inclusion, equity, and parity. These are kind of the 4 buzzwords that people all group together when they talk about diversity in tech. Now, show of hands, how many people actually like the word diversity? Oh, okay. I personally don't, so I'm more of an inclusion fan, because I feel like it's easier to lead with inclusion, because everyone has a story, no matter who you are and where you're from, about a time in which you were excluded from something. And when you lead with diversity, I find, and particularly if you're in a room in which there's a particular majority, their eyes glaze over and they check out because they think it doesn't apply to them. So I don't want to make you feel like I'm picking on you white guys, but typically their eyes glaze over and they're like, well, this isn't my purview. I'm not a woman. I may not be differently abled. I may not be LGBTQ. This isn't something for me. But it is very much about you, because you are in rooms that a lot of those other marginalized folks are not in. And so it is imperative that you can also think through some of these blind spots and issues and be an ally. Does anybody know how equity got thrown into this mix? If you do, just raise your hand. Oh, okay. So we're going to learn something today. So first is diversity. I define that personally as bean counting. Tis the season right now, it's spring, and so tech companies roll out their diversity reports where they tell you how many black people work there, how many women work there, how many differently abled, how many veterans, throw it all in there, right? And that doesn't tell you anything about how those people's work is valued at that company. It just tells you what butts are in seats. So inclusion is really the bigger piece, because that means that those folks have a seat at the table. They are helping to design and ideate and to test things that were going to be shipped. And if we don't have that inclusive nature, the diversity doesn't matter at all. You might as well just cancel that out. Equity, so that means, are we actually being seen at the right levels? So when you're looking at diversity and inclusion, the equity piece is also, when you look at those diversity reports this year, note how many people are in senior management. Typically not a lot. So when you're talking specifically about black and brown folks and differently abled folks as well, they are usually not in leadership ranks. And that is a problem, because that means that their voices are drowned out or not even invited to sit at the table when those products are being made, and even more importantly, when they're being tested. So that brings up an issue around principles and profit, right? Everyone's all about, like, ship fast, ship it now, get it out, get it done. The issue with that is that you're oftentimes missing things. I'll give you an example. So I was an attorney at Facebook, save your ire. I'll take questions at the end. You can pile on then. But during the creation of some of those products, particularly around live, a couple of us did ask questions about, okay, well, this is a cool concept. We like it. Do you have a kill switch? Because someone is going to disrobe on this thing. Someone is going to be caught in the commission of a crime. Someone may kill someone on this. Do you have a kill switch? And the answer was, well, we don't need that. People self-regulate behavior, and okay. And then you have other issues when you think of the self-serve platform, right? The ad platform was self-service. So I could target, and there's a HUD lawsuit that was filed at the beginning of April. That's a whole different issue with Ben Carson suing Facebook is weird, but I mean, forgive me for being a little skeptical of the idea that Ben Carson really wants to enforce civil rights for EEOC and HUD. But his issue is a valid one. The self-serve platform allows people to self-select, do I want to show this housing ad to only white women between the ages of 25 and 40 in this particular locale? So you're building what the customer says that they want, but you're also enabling them to break the law. So it's how are you thinking through those things? If someone who could have raised that issue was sitting there, or even thought through, well, what are the ways that you can use this tool for nefarious purposes? Those are the questions that are not being asked, and those are the questions that are not being raised, and those are the things that lead to housing discrimination, employment discrimination, subversion of democracy. Pick your favorite. Data and privacy breaches. A fun fact about that HUD lawsuit, the only reason why the HUD lawsuit was filed is because Facebook would not allow the Department of Housing and Urban Development to have unfettered access to Facebook data. Now, I will say that to me is hopeful and optimistic that they would rather be sued by the government than to allow Ben Carson to have unfettered access to your profile, because who knows what he would do with that. Probably not much. So what are the ethical issues when you're thinking through? I would say there are three large issues around this. So one is going to be lack of diversity in matters that expose you to bad product creation. So that's the idea around let's say, something around like Live or the ad platform. Another issue around Live is if you can take payments via Messenger, you can create a closed group, you can broadcast live solely to that group. You have now essentially created a webcam business on a free platform. Nobody seemed to think about that either. That could also be used for child trafficking. It's things like that where you need to have people who have different lived experiences or may not be related to people who skirt the law and can give you actual examples. These are the things that need to be discussed and talked about. Second piece, so if you're working on a matter and you realize that there is a huge blind spot and it has unintended disparate impact. So something like that could be seen in when you're working on AI. That's a huge, huge issue, particularly around facial recognition technology, around voice and speech recognition, because it doesn't understand certain slang terms, colloquialisms. It invalidates language of people. And so if you do not have people who are diverse that can work on these products, you're going to get something that isn't going to be as useful as it can be. Third thing, and this may not necessarily apply so much for this audience, but it is something to think about when you're sitting in meetings and you build something and you ask, well, how are you guys gonna publicize it or market it? Terrible, terrible example. I saw a Twitter ad, I think back in October, and it stuck with me because it was just in such poor form. It was, I believe it was a Latinx family, and he was buying his mom lotto tickets, but it was done in a very, very condescending way of essentially indicating that they're poor, and so they need these lotto tickets to get out of poverty. And when I saw it, I just thought to myself, who signed off on this? And other examples of things like this, Ancestry.com had an ad that was pulled a couple weeks ago. Did anybody see this ad? It was essentially like romanticizing slavery. Yeah, it was terrible. But essentially, it took sort of the basis of the Sally Hemings and Jefferson love story. I don't know how a love story works when you're enslaved by your man. But essentially it was, okay, well, let's escape. We can escape and run north. And the first thing I thought was, well, what is he escaping from? He can go freely. Like, that's not even a question. But he's encouraging this woman to go. And then the last shot says, well, this story could have ended here, but you're here. So discover more. It's like, this is just so beyond tone deaf. So you see things like that, you wonder, well, who signed off on this? Who was in the room when this decision was made? Is there anybody that raised their hand and said, perhaps we need a different ad agency for this, or perhaps this shouldn't be an ad that we're actually going to use? And sometimes I understand you can't do that because it's scary to raise your hand and raise your voice. So, other issues where you can see that the legal issues, the ethical issues dovetail with diversity problems. So, Cambridge Analytica and voter suppression. I could riff on that for hours. But essentially, you have, someone taking data and using it that's not supposed to as a third party on a platform to essentially suppress minority votes. You understand how people feel, what they like, what appeals to them, and then you create targeted ads for those people, targeted for that community, to say, oh, well, if you think Clinton and Trump are the same, I'll just stay home, it'll be fine. Okay, here we are. The other piece with that is that you have people that are using information from a third-party platform and you're not then bothering to follow up and to audit every other third party on the platform. Because if that one got through, you can guarantee there's more than one. It's not going to be just Cambridge Analytica. There are going to be others. And a lot of it is we can't really say anything about it at this point because everyone that joined Facebook basically signed away their lives to play Candy Crush in 2009. And so So your information is out there. Now, Apple, they had a cognitive diversity versus representational diversity issue. Does everybody know what cognitive diversity is? Yeah. No, okay. So cognitive diversity is the idea that as long as I have different beliefs than you, then I'm diverse. So, and the example that the former diversity officer at Apple gave said, you could have 12 white men in a room and that's diverse. And I literally did this, like scratched my head and said, okay, well, technically yes, because one could be Norwegian, one could be from Iowa, one could be Republican, one could be independent. So yes, technically you could have diversity if you're looking at it through that lens of do they think differently. But what I feel is a false narrative around that argument is what the tech industry is trying to solve for is representational diversity. It's not necessarily trying to solve for cognitive. The other false premise embedded in that is that representational diversity often yields the cognitive diversity that you're speaking about. So you can't bifurcate them. You can't have one without the other. They're conjoined. But yeah, so that was, she now works elsewhere. The First Step Act. So how many people, and maybe I'm just the only like legal nerd who really got into this last year, but how many people actually watched the congressional hearings with Mark Zuckerberg, the Google CEO, Jack, Cheryl? Did anybody watch any of those last year? Okay. So does anybody remember the exchange between the Google CEO and Representative Steve King, who asked him why his iPhone didn't work? Right. So he literally holds up an iPhone and says, you know, I just don't understand why this doesn't work. And he's like, wrong guy, I don't work there. But this is a very dangerous issue of where you see policy, legal, ethical issues, product creation dovetail, because everyone agrees to a certain extent that there needs to be some regulation. There's no agreement on what that regulation should look like. And there's definitely fear of the idea of someone who is talking and questioning a Google CEO in a congressional hearing, asking about his iPhone, which is made by a completely different company. That isn't who you want regulating your technology. That's absolutely not what you want. And one of my favorite exchanges was during Mark's testimony last April, and Senator Orrin Hatch asked him how they make money. And and you could see like he was trying to stifle laughter, and he says, Senator, we sell ads. And he's like, oh, so that's how you make all that money. These are not the people you want regulating your technology. It's like trying to explain the internet to your grandfather, which is kind of what he was doing. So the issue around that also leads to anytime you have a legal issue, particularly if it dovetails with politics, as in anything to do with, you know, trolls and bot farms that we saw on Twitter spreading disinformation campaigns, and Hillary Clinton runs this like trafficking ring out of a pizza shop, whole thing. You're gonna have liability exposure, at least based off PR. And so the easiest thing to do is to always think about how will this impact my business and how is this going to make us look? I think oftentimes the focus is so much on speed of shipping and getting the product out that people ignore defects. And their thinking is, okay, well, we'll just get it out now, see how it works. If no one notices this or uses it for nefarious purposes, it's fine. It actually isn't fine, because somebody will find a way to exploit the tool. They always do. And all that leads to is your company being dragged on Twitter, and you essentially are going to get sued. So, what can coders, engineers, and designers do to push for ethical solutions to these problems? Lots of things. So one, I always say advocacy starts from the inside. There's only so much external pressure will work. Yes, it does work, and it works very well, as we've seen. But what you don't want is to have your company put in a position where they're faced with that external pressure. The easiest thing to do in the first course of action should be to push from the inside, to say, hey, this is what's happening. This is how I see that this tool could be exploited or used for bad reasons by bad people. Do we have any stopgap measures in order to fix this? And if the answer is no, we don't, then you need to go back and create one. Or if the answer is, as I've heard other clients say, oh, well, nobody would do that. Okay. Okay. And I always try to be, the way I'm talking to you now is the way that I talk to my clients. I am very direct. I'm going to give you the real 100% every time. And my thing is, I am a black woman from Oakland, California. I am from East Oakland. I could tell you probably 18 different ways somebody could manipulate a tool and use it for bad purposes. And I'm a lawyer, so I'm not even a criminal. But if anything, I'm reverse hacking it and telling you, well, if I were a criminal, this is what I would do. And so those are the things that you need to think about. And I always try to be the person that raises my hand and says things. And to the prior speaker's point, that does come with some risk. It's nobody wants to see the person who is going to tell you that, have you thought about this, or maybe this is wrong. Nobody wants to see that person coming. But that person is actually going to save you in the end if you listen to them. So the issue around that is also that in order for you to keep and retain business, you have to walk the walk. You can't just put out the nice, colorful brochures and you have like, you know, a woman and a person of color and then like a differently abled person. And it's like, look, diversity at our company, it's fantastic. And it might be. But how often are those people in the room when decisions are made and hard questions are asked? And if they do ask the hard questions, how often do people listen? And then, not only how much do they listen, how do they implement? Ideas are fantastic. Execution is better. And I think everybody in here understands that because that's your job. So, solutions. Be proactive about bringing all the voices to the table. One thing that a perfect example of this, I was sitting in, so I work for, my founder would hate me for calling it an incubator. He hates the word incubator. So I will say we nurture companies. So all turtles, we nurture AI companies. And we had a fantastic demo of one of the company's new product, and it was great. I loved it. And everyone went around the table and talked about how fantastic it was. And I said, yeah, it is fantastic. How does a blind person use this? Because you have to look at the interface, and if I'm blind, I can't see it. And everyone kind of got quiet. I'm like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. Now, perfectly normal that someone wouldn't have thought about that, because when we're sitting in that room, there was no one who was differently abled in that room. But I think it is important that you don't have to be in and of a particular community to ask questions that are relevant to those communities. And oftentimes that's where it comes in, where I don't want you guys your eyes to glaze over when you hear the word diversity, because oftentimes you are in rooms that other people are not in. And it's not to say that we collectively shouldn't be in those rooms, but for whatever reason we're not invited. And so it is the duty of the person who's in the room to ask those hard questions for the people that aren't in there. I liken it almost to, when I graduated from college, we had a speaker, and I think it was Michael Eric Dyson, and he implored us to be Trojan horses, and that you are essentially sneaking in all those people who are not allowed into those rooms because you have this level of education and access and they don't. So it's your job to continue to speak for them. So that is my charge to you. Deliberately ask yourself how you can be an ally. Be the Trojan horse. How can you stand up and show up for someone today? Someone other than yourself. Ask the hard questions. Bless you. And when you're looking at solving a problem, ask yourself if this answer or solution would work for women, differently abled, people of color, poor people. There's a fantastic series that the New York Times is doing on privacy, and if you haven't looked at it, it's fantastic. And there is an entire article about what it means to be poor in the digital economy. And it's very interesting, and I will say, I caught my own blind spot with that. I hadn't thought about that. And the only way that I had thought about it, to a certain extent, was around the use of AI technology. When you're dealing with poorer communities, they're policed more, so predictive policing is used in their neighborhoods. That's based on historical data. I could riff on that for a completely different hour, but you all don't have time for that, because I think I'm the last thing standing between you and drinks. And my own drink, because I want to celebrate my bag being found. But it is fascinating to think about how these things are used and can actually manipulate marginalized communities, including women and including differently abled folks. That determines your creditworthiness, also based on historical data. All of those things are key things that people should think about. So if you haven't read that, I would suggest that you go at least see there about 20 articles in their privacy profile, and super, super fascinating. The article about the poor in the digital economy, though, was really, really good. And so, fourth point, if you have an intended solution, or you have a fix or a product, and you're not really sure what those negative consequences could be, like, a webcam set up on your platform, if you aren't sure, refer back to number one and be proactive about bringing all those voices to the table to have them ask the questions. Even better, if you have the employee base in which to do so, beta test your products with people from different backgrounds within your own company to see if they can hack something or come up with some reason why something may or may not work. And now I will open it up to you. So I always love questions. I always love things to be interactive, and I feel like if people have questions, want to ask something, that's also how you get more out of it. And I promise this is a safe space. I will not judge any of your questions. I welcome any and all questions. Yep. She's got a mic for you.
Oh, hey. One of your first slides was about diversity versus inclusion. And inclusion is definitely the goal, but doesn't diversity have to come before that? Like if you don't have the diversity, then how can you have the inclusion?
Yeah, so honestly, I think they have a symbiotic relationship, to be honest. I feel like you can garner more diversity in your company if you first demonstrate that you're inclusive. And I know that sounds backwards to a certain extent, but it's if you are making sure that you are hiring. So we have a phrase that we use where it's called find, keep, grow. And you could interchange keep and grow and switch them, because you could find the talent, but if you don't grow them, you won't keep them. And you could find them, and if you don't keep them, you won't grow them. So it works both ways. But I always feel like inclusion is such an easy lead, because everyone has a story about being excluded from something, whether that's you're still really upset about not being picked first in kickball in third grade, or it could be something where you felt like you were really, really qualified for a job and you didn't get it. Everyone has a story where they did not feel that they were justly served. And so I feel like inclusion is a much easier way to discuss this topic versus starting with diversity, because if someone automatically finds or thinks that they are not diverse, they remove themselves from the conversation and they're not going to participate. And that's what you don't want. You want more voices at the table. And so every voice should be included, not just the diverse people.
Hey, so as you can see, I'm a white male. And so your points about, diversity, cognitive diversity versus actual diversity, I really want to understand. And so as like a Trojan horse, I may find myself in those rooms, right? And I want to represent, more diverse, thinking. How do I know that I'm saying the right thing? Or like, where do I get those ideas? Because I'm a white man.
don't discount your experience, though. You know what I mean? Like, you've interacted with people from different backgrounds your entire life, and that probably has informed some of your thinking and some of the views that you hold. And it's very easy to just look. I would caution you to not necessarily think about, oh, am I saying the right thing? And I totally get that, because you're worried that you're going to use maybe the wrong acronym or the wrong name or the wrong descriptor. And I wouldn't worry so much about that so much as what's the message that you're delivering. And I think that as long as you are in the room and you're choosing to be an ally and you're asking questions that maybe someone else would ask if they had been invited to the table, that's the right way to think about it and to go. Or another alternative could be, oh, well, we don't have so-and-so in this meeting. Maybe we should bring them in next time and ask. That's an even better way to show up and be an ally, is you don't have to necessarily speak for the person. Bring the person to the party.
I've got another question about being in the room. Do you have advice for what to do when you're in the room, you speak up, and the answer isn't, oh, we didn't think of that, but that's not important?
Oh, yeah, I've dealt with that. Welcome, subversion of democracy. Yeah, I mean, trying to think of a good analogy to give you for that. So when I was at Facebook, I'm an attorney, but I built the supplier diversity program. And the reason being is, and that was something I did for 2 years by myself on the side. And the reason why is it was a passion project because the employee numbers were abysmal. And if you are not actively engaging a workforce, well, then you can use consultants and other people outside of this business that can give you that perspective. And if you're paying them, you're going to listen to them. You're like, oh, you're just a regular employee. Like, girl, go back and do this contract. Versus you're paying $100,000 to these consultants. You're going to listen to what their advice is. So that's one thing. A second thing I would say is that, and how I made the argument to even create that was by telling them how much money they stand to lose if they are not proactive about incorporating more diversity into their business. The other piece to that is gentrification, right? Facebook is now what, like a 2-mile-long thing that's eating Menlo Park in East Palo Alto. And you can't hire everyone who wants to work there, and not everybody wants to work for someone else. But what you can do is provide economic opportunity via allowing consulting businesses, janitorial service, whatever it may be, so those people can stay in their communities. And it's making the financial argument to say, okay, well, if you don't do this, have you thought about how much this would cost us in bad PR, if there are any legal ramifications in terms of if we're going to be sued? And have you thought about this from a standpoint of, will you lose customers? If you always lead with a financial argument, people will perk up. If you tell someone how much money they stand to gain or lose, they're listening.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for what you're talking about. But I was wondering, as a woman of color, like, what is your advice to other women of color or other folks from unrepresented backgrounds when it just seems like someone's asking for advice, like, hey, how can I be a better ally? And sometimes you're like, well, I don't really know. Mm-hmm. What would be like your top 3 things, just interpersonal, not necessarily related to work, that you would give to folks who want to be better allies?
Mm-hmm. So how you can be a better ally is, 1, have hard conversations one-on-one with people that you trust, because that also will inform you in terms of what are the issues that they're thinking about personally and also within their communities. Second point is raise those issues if that person is not in the room when you're in a meeting. The better thing to do is to bring that person to the meeting. That's one thing that people have talked a lot about mentors and mentorship, and that's great, but a sponsor is what's going to actually propel you forward. A mentor is fantastic. You can talk to your mentor, they can give you advice, but if you have a sponsor, particularly inside of your company or inside of a company in which you're going to, That is what's going to get you in those rooms. That's what's going to get you the promos. That's what's going to get you the work that gets you seen. So if you want to be a good ally, also be a sponsor. And don't just, you know, I'm trying to remember, I heard a talk with a VC, and one of the things he was saying, and I don't believe that he, you know, was malicious about it. It's just, you know, his conversation is, I love to mentor people who remind me of myself. Okay, well, I'm automatically X'd out of that because, you know, this is like a 5'7" rich white dude. That's not me at all. And so it's, if everyone takes the mindset of, I only want to help people that look like me, you're just perpetuating and exacerbating a system that's already in place. The greater thing to do is to take someone who is not like you at all, and how can you help mold and shape their career and help them be better, and also learn in the process from that person. I always believe that it's an equal exchange. It isn't just I'm taking from you and you're giving to me. It's an even exchange if you're doing it correctly. So I would say make sure that you're having individual conversations with people that you trust so that they can understand your perspective and you can understand theirs. Actively include people in meetings if you don't. If you cannot include them in the meetings, voice their opinions and speak up for them. And be a sponsor. Be an active sponsor.
Do you think unionization of tech workers can help with these issues?
Say again?
Do you think unionization of tech workers can help with these issues?
Sorry, I was like, I feel like my mom's just like standing behind me saying, fix your face, fix your face, fix your face. She probably is. Her ears are probably burning. Yes and no, right? Like, I feel like the hard part, though, is some companies are doing that to a certain extent. Like, I think Slack is a good example of someone who's doing it. But I would say the majority don't. And that's what's really hard. I think, you know, the biggest part of it, too, is culture, is company culture. If the focus is going to be on shipping fast, everyone is focused on just, like, getting their work done and getting it done quickly and going home and going about their regular life. Like, people are not setting aside the time to go and have those conversations with colleagues to understand those points. And I think it doesn't have to be super personal, but to embed a bit more of personal interaction into work actually helps you collaborate better, you make better products, and it could be a better case for that utilization.
Hi. I have a question about sort of this inherent quality to certain types of technologies that actually exclude people, maybe almost inadvertently. I'm thinking about things like Face ID on the iPhone that may not work equally across all races and cultures, or, you know, VR headsets where there's sort of an assumed interpupillary distance that they have to kind of adhere the VR mask to. And other technologies where the person creating the technology may not necessarily be racist or a bad person, but they are participating in a technology that they know is going to not perform as well for people. What are you, I don't know what my question is, other than what are your thoughts around that? And if you're even like a smaller company that doesn't necessarily have the resources, and you can create something for 80 or 85% of your customers, knowing that you might be inventing a technology that's actually going to be excluding people, is that unethical? Is it morally wrong to even create it at all?
So here's the thing. I don't want to attribute blame for something like that, because oftentimes it's unintentional, right? Like, they're not saying, ooh, I'm going to make this technology just for like straight able-bodied white dudes and like no one else. I don't think that's how people intentionally go into something, but I think that, like everyone else, we create things based off of our lens and how we see the world. And so if that's how you move about the world, that's what you're going to build. And it isn't nefarious, but that's where I come back to, have you beta tested this with other people of different communities and colors? And if you haven't, then you should. And to your point, my favorite example of that is TSA. You can see my skeleton, but you can't see through my hair? Like, literally, it's the weirdest thing, is that having to go through security and, like, my hair goes off. Why? It's hair. I mean, trust me, there's nothing in there except hair products. But it happens every time I wash my hair. When my hair is dry, for whatever reason, it doesn't. But when it's wet, it goes off every single time. And every black woman I know has the same story. And that's because clearly someone who built this technology was not thinking about black women with natural hair, which, you know, makes sense if that's the lens through which they view the world. But the problem is, I keep getting random searches because somebody didn't think outside of the box that other people are going to be going through security and flying. So it's making sure that you have people beta testing your products and at the table to ask these questions before you ship something.
Hi, thank you for this talk. This is a great topic, and I'm glad that you're discussing this. My question is, are we creating a self-fulfilling prophecy? We have created a culture in which we have the most privileged people working in a space with the most power, and we're doing it in the place with the most expensive cost of living ever created that will exclude people just because of the amount of privilege that's required to enter into the space. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to afford to be in the space. You need to afford to have the connections in the space. And much of this starts at elite colleges or with elite levels of education that are not available to lots of people. Mm-hmm. We have started to make some ground in lower level entry positions through boot camps and things, but this can be seen through higher level openings in companies not being filled by people who do not have the privilege that is required to reach that rank. I believe that we need to move out of this model of being stuck in Silicon Valley and move the equity, capital, and money out of Silicon Valley in order to create products that actually represent a group of people beyond the people that can have the privilege to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So my larger issue around that is that it isn't, I refuse to believe the premise that the most creative, smartest, innovative people live in one tiny region, in one state, in one country, in an entire world. Like, that's just not the truth. Talent is equally dispersed. The access and the opportunity are not. That's the difference. So to your point, when I tell people that you do want to look for other candidates, like my grandmother had this saying where it's like, to get something you haven't got, you have to do something you haven't done. So you cannot continuously look at Stanford and Berkeley. I went to Berkeley, but still, you can't go to Stanford and Berkeley and MIT and Harvard and think that you're going to have like this huge, wide, diverse pool, whether that's socioeconomic or racial or gender-based. It's just not going to happen. And I feel like I tell people this all the time, but North Carolina A&T is an HBCU. They graduate thousands of engineers every year. And nobody is actively going to this school to recruit. But there's a wide population of black engineers. There's a whole NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. There's also one for Latinx. These are very easy resources, but I often find that people don't utilize resources, one, because they don't know that they exist, or two, they don't think that they're useful. I tend to believe this is more of the former versus the latter, is that people don't know that these organizations and these schools exist. But that's also because they keep going to like the same 10 places. So you're going to have to widen your pool in order to do that. The other piece is looking at candidates holistically. So sometimes a candidate may not have that exact on-point experience that you want. And side note, job descriptions are often written very, very poorly and in a discriminatory manner. And what's interesting about that is the Harvard Business Review study where men could have 55% of the qualifications on a job description, and they're like, crushed it, I'm getting this job, I'm applying. And women wait until they're closer to 90% and can check each box. And if you can't check the last box, you find an analogous argument. My case for that is that we should be looking at people holistically, and if they have analogous experience somewhere else and they show that they're a quick study, why would you not want to give them a chance? So your point is a very, very good one. Also, it's way too expensive to live in the Bay. Last one? Okay.
I was curious about the previous question about labor unions in technology, in software development.
Say that again?
There's a previous question about labor unions in software development. I was wondering what your thoughts are on activities like the Google walkout and the revolt against Project Maven, up to and including labor unions in software development, have to address these concerns across the entire industry.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, you see a lot now, a lot of employee activism. You had Microsoft employees, Amazon employees, folks signing petitions and walking out because they didn't want their facial recognition technology used by the Department of Defense. I get it. Part of working at these companies is that you may be building things that you don't necessarily like. And that is kind of a personal moral dilemma in terms of how fulfilled and satisfied are you working for a company or working on a product and building something that you don't like the end result. I think that goes back to being internal advocates, that if you have this employee activism, that oftentimes will get more done. My concern, particularly from a legal standpoint, is retaliation. And we've seen some of that kind of bubble up with, you know, I think the two women who initially led the Google walkout they're claiming that they're being retaliated against. I don't know how true that may or may not be, but I also would not doubt that that's what happens. And retaliation looks different in a HR and legal perspective, because all that means now is like I'm scrutinizing your work with a much greater eye to what you're doing. Your performance review is going to be really, really strict, but you can't point to that and definitively say that's retaliation. So that's the hard part. Thank you. You guys were great.
Great job.
Thank you.